So we will start kicking off. As you guys can see, the etiquette is the same for this session as with all of them. Welcome to, let me actually just present this. That should come up better. Just bear with me, sorry guys. Making sure the tech is all set up properly. So that I can actually see you guys as well. That doesn't want to work. Oh well, we'll figure it out. If you have questions, put it in the chat because I cannot see you. So first up, this is obviously the treasurer breakout. So well done for signing up to be the treasurer of your club if that's what you've done. If not, if you're just here to represent your treasurer and learn, good job for you too. So my name is Claire Lawler. I am the incoming treasurer for Rotaract Australia. I also work as a graduate accountant for RSM Australia. So I hold a Bachelor of Accounting and have a fair bit of accounting experience. I previously worked for a non-profit organisation in their finance department for over 3 years. So I have a good understanding of how finances should work and that sort of thing. Within Rotaract, I have been the District Rotaract representative for District 9700 in New South Wales for the last 3 years, and I'm very happy to be handing that role over to someone else as of 1st of July. I've also been treasurer of my club, treasurer of a heap of different committees and organisations and that sort of thing. So too many to list here. This overview was written by someone else, but essentially that is what we'll be covering today in our session. It may not go for the full hour, but if so, that just means you guys get a nice little morning tea break for the next session, but I'll try and fill in as much time as I can. Also means we might have some time for questions at the end. So first up, what do your clubs look like? So you've all mostly put in the chat now, whether you're community incorporated or not, or university, all the different details. So just having a quick look at that chat. Looks like we do have a good mix. I'm gonna put it out right now that I'm familiar with incorporation rules in New South Wales, but I'm not familiar with any other states of Australia. So I can give you a broad understanding of what you'll need to do, but you will need to do further research to make sure you're meeting all of your legal obligations if your club is incorporated. Next slide. So what does a treasurer do? Does everyone know what a treasurer does? Has everyone got a good understanding? Have you read the Rotaract handbook, which describes the role? If anyone has no idea what a treasurer does, if you could just chuck that in the chat. Cool, sounds like everyone knows. So this slide here is straight from the Rotaract Australia, not the Rotaract, sorry, the Rotaract handbook designed by Rotary International. So the roles and responsibilities of a treasurer are basically just to worry about the money. Obviously, it's all explained out there for you. So you've got to do things like paying bills, doing a budget, reporting to your club each month. So if like on your club's board meeting every month, you should be reporting to the board what your bank account balance is, what expenses you paid that month, what income you've had that month, a report just of ins and outs and that sort of thing. If you're incorporated, you do then need to report to your incorporation body in the state. So you have to provide financial reports at the end of each year. Other than that, you have to do an annual report for your club anyway. So if you're incorporated, do the same annual report, make it easy and simple rather than doing 2 separate ones. If not, I would still recommend doing, if you're not incorporated, do a similar report anyway to cover things off because it's a good standard to set. It does say at the top there, though, that the treasurer should be responsible for chairing the finance committee. Does anyone actually have a finance committee in their club? So I got 1 no. Anyone else want to check in the chat whether they've got one? Cool. Okay, looking like no one does. I personally don't have one in my club either. We never have, or we've never had the need. So I think if you've got a big club, potentially it might be worthwhile to have a finance committee. But I think for most of our clubs, it's not worth worrying about. There's other things we can be doing with our time. Can you guys hear the presentation that's coming from next door, by the way? Is that super loud, or am I, like, you can hear me okay? Okay, cool. Excellent. So they're running the president's session next door, and the wall that we've got is not like a proper wall that separates us. So I can hear them, but I'm glad it's not coming through for you guys. So yeah, that's basically the roles and responsibilities. If you guys have any questions about that, I should check. Is anyone, like, are you all new treasurers, or some of you been treasurer before? What's the status of the group that we've got? Just so I can figure out how much detail I need to provide. If you could just put in the chat whether it's your first time or not. Cool. Right, so mostly newbies. Nice, Alistair. It's always fun being a default treasurer. Cool. Awesome. We'll move on to the next slide. So, there's that one. So one of the things on the past slide was responsibility was creating a budget. So you have to do a budget for your club each year. That can be hard to estimate. I personally find that it's hard to estimate how much fundraising we're going to do, because you can't really estimate how much people are going to donate to your cause. So I like to exclude that from the budget. And for my club budget, I would do something similar to this. So purely got your income and expenses, making sure that your income from your dues, from your membership dues, are enough to cover whatever expenses you need. These figures I've just pulled out of thin air, so they may not be accurate for your club at all. You might also have a long list of expenses. So depending on where you meet, you might have to pay a room hire fee, depending on whether you provide meals, like whether your members pay a meal fee to, like a lot of Rotary clubs do, or whether your club members just order their meal at a counter and do that if you have meals with your meetings. Otherwise, you might have things in there, like you might need to buy like a pop-up banner this year, or your badges budget could be quite a lot higher because you've got a heap of members this year, and that sort of thing. You may also have other funding sources. So my club personally, we have 2 sponsoring Rotary clubs, and one of those clubs does 2 major events each year, and they need a lot of volunteers to run those events in our town. So what they do is they get volunteers from all of the different Rotary clubs in the area and the Rotaract clubs, and we get paid an amount per person that does a shift that comes as a donation to our club. So we use that to cover our expenses for the year. So our advertising, our promotion, ordering pizza for new members nights, that sort of thing, rather than having to charge that fee onto the members. So that you can look at all the different income sources that are available to you and figure out from that. Realistically though, does everyone understand the concept of breaking even? If you could just pop in the chat. Cool. Okay, everyone's saying yes. So essentially, just in case someone says no but is too scared to say no, breaking even just means that your income is covering your costs. So you want to make sure that your budget does break even. If you've got funds remaining, that's a nice little bonus. If not, that's an issue, and you need to make sure that your income is covering your expenses of sorts. So back to this slide, I've also written here that I personally would recommend doing a separate budget for each event and project that you do. So I would not include that in the normal annual club budget, because you don't know before the 1st of July what events you might hold, and you don't know what income you're going to have and expenses for those events. So there's no point putting it in the club budget and having that club budget for the year being purely based on club income, club expenses. And then when you're holding an event, do a whole separate budget. So for example, if you're holding a ball or something, with that break even thing, I would be making sure that your expenses are going to be covered by the ticket price. So I don't have a good example in this presentation, but I'll just verbalize it. If, say, you want to charge, you're having a ball, obviously your fixed costs and your variable costs need to be included. So your fixed costs would be things like the venue hire, whether you're paying a speaker to speak there, your decorations, all of those things. And then your variable costs would be the meals that you're serving to that person. If you're doing an open bar, whether you're paying like $10 per person or something like that, and doing an analysis to make sure all of that. And then also in your fixed costs, I would say, okay, we want to make sure we raise, for example, at least $1,000 for this ball. So that is one of your fixed costs that you then make sure your ticket price needs to cover those fixed costs and your variable cost. So it might be that you need at least 20 people, for example, to come to cover the fixed costs. So if you can't sell more than 20 tickets to the event, it's not viable to have. It's just going to cost you more money than it's worth. So maybe look at doing something else. But for a more simple event, like a barbecue, for example, this is a spreadsheet that I use in my club. So this isn't necessarily a budget, but it was what we used at the end of the event as well, to reconcile what we'd made and reconcile all the expenses. It is handy though having that there for the next time we want to run a barbecue, that then, you know, we know how much we spent on sausages last time. Well, we know like this is how much onions cost us. Probably in here what I would do is I would add in a line just saying how many people attended the event. So this event, for example, there's a conservatorium in my town. They hold an outdoor concert every year. So there's like kids that perform, their parents will come there. And then we basically, like, they used to run the barbecue themselves, but it cost them more money than it was worth because they had to pay wages for someone to stand there and run a barbecue plus all the sausage costs and everything. So they reached out to us and asked if we would be interested in running the barbecue for them. So we purely come in, we get to use their barbecue, which makes things so much easier. They provide the gas bottle. We just have to bring the sausages, bread, utensils, and ourselves. And it's really easy fundraiser because the crowd's already there. So you're guaranteed to sell some sausages, a bit like a Bunnings barbecue, but just even easier, I think. So I would note down that, you know, maybe like 200 people attended this event. So we know that we needed $100 worth of sausages for 200 people. But if they were anticipating that they were going to have only 50 people attend one of their concerts, we would know that we don't need to buy quite so many sausages for that one. But this, I saw, Alistair, you've asked if we can share the spreadsheet. I'm more than happy to send a blank copy out to everyone. More back. But you can see in here, like, we've got exactly how much fund we've raised. I've also put in what we're raising the funds for. So in this instance, it was only going to club funds. If you were doing a fundraiser where you had advertised that you were donating it to charity, you could put the charity in here. And then as treasurer, it would be really easy to see, okay, this is exactly how much we raised from that event for that charity. That's how much I need to pass on as a donation. Also with the cash, it's easy when you're counting up your till at the end of the night, which with the sausage is all you've got to do. So an easy little thing. Any questions about a budget for an event or anything like that? Cool, excellent, thanks Amelia. All right, so another thing that you have to do as treasurer is you actually have to collect the income. So now you've budgeted that you're going to receive this income, you've got to make sure you get it somehow. To collect income, you should be issuing invoices. So if you've got members who are paying membership dues or membership fees, you need to issue them an invoice requesting that they pay $20, $50, however much it is that you charge. So if any of you haven't done any accounting or finance work before, an invoice is what you issue to request the payment, and then once someone has paid, you issue a receipt. You can write on an invoice that it's an invoice / receipt if you want to just do the one thing. But yeah, like you can't give someone a receipt when they haven't paid yet, basically. So an invoice legally must include the following things that are listed there. So if your Rotaract Club is registered for GST, then it does need to state that it is a tax invoice rather than just an invoice. However, if you're not registered for GST, legally it doesn't have to say tax invoice, it just has to say the word invoice. I haven't got an example of an invoice in the slides, but you should all know what it looks like. If you have a look at, I don't know, a bill that, like your electricity bill that you've received or something, like that's an invoice. It should have all of this information for Origin or whoever your electricity provider is. But you've got to make sure that it has to have a unique invoice number. You can't use the same invoice number twice. I would recommend with your clubs, because the treasurer is going to change year on year, that maybe your invoice number would be like, say for next year, 2020/2021, and then -001 for the first invoice, -002, continuing on. but that way you can see like the year that it's related to, because otherwise, like, you might issue like 50 invoices this financial year. So then realistically, starting 1st of July, the following financial year, you should be starting at 51 if you're continuing on with that. So at least if you include the year number in the invoice number, you can start at 1 again when you start next year, so that you don't have to try and figure out what invoice number the past treasurer was up to. So with the GST registration, there is a threshold. So if your annual turnover is under $75,000, you do not have to register for GST in Australia. However, if it is more than that, then you are required, except I think for a non-profit, if you can prove that you're a non-profit, which there's like different legalities of what you have to do, then the threshold increases to 150,000. So I know there are some Rotary clubs that hold really, really big fundraisers and do raise that sort of money, and they have to be registered for GST. Some districts, for example, they have those sort of budgets and are moving that sort of money, they have to be registered for GST. But I would imagine, unless your Rotaract club is really, really fantastic, I don't think you're going to be raising 150 grand in a financial year, or maybe even 75 in a financial year. So probably don't need to worry about registering for GST. If you do register, it means you then have to do activity statements every quarter and submit it to the ATO, and it's just a lot of extra work. So if you can avoid it, recommend avoiding it. So the other details needed on the invoice is you need to have your club's legal name. So if you are incorporated, it needs to say, for example, like Hills Rotaract Incorporated, if that's your incorporated name. Otherwise, it should say Rotaract Club of Hills or whatever, for example, basing on the Hills Rotaract, because that's your legal name per Rotary International. But yeah, if you're incorporated, it needs to be that incorporated legal name, which could be different. You then need to say, like, have contact information. So whether you have a PO box, that's fine, or a registered address. Otherwise, it can just be an email address and maybe even a phone number as your contact information. It doesn't have to go like be a full, like, this is the address, this is all our details, like a proper business. Just needs some way for the person to get in touch with you if they have queries about the invoice. You then need who the invoice is to. So for example, if you're invoicing your member for their membership dues, have their name. The description of what you're charging for would then be membership fees for 2020/2021 year, the cost, however much your membership fee is, how to pay. So you might put on there, if you like prefer payment by cash, just pay by cash. Otherwise, your bank account details. So you should then be including your BSB account number and account name. Say if you've got PayPal set up or another way, or I know for my club, we're a university club, all payments have to be done online through the university's online shop portal thing. So we can actually issue invoices anyway with that. But if we were to do that, it would be, say, go on here and pay for it. And then, yeah, as I mentioned before, does need the word invoice on there somewhere. I'd recommend having it like in the top right-hand corner or something, rather than just, somewhere random on the page saying the word invoice, but legally has to be on the page somewhere. How should you take payments? Or make payments, sorry, not take payments. So you should only pay for things that have been approved by the club. So with that budget that you agree on at the start of the year, the club should probably be voting on that and agreeing on it. So say then if you've budgeted $100 for promotion and you've gone out and ordered some posters and they've cost $20, you could pay for that, fine, with no other approval really. But if you then ordered posters and they came to be $120, which is over your budgeted value, you would definitely need prior approval from the club before just paying it. You should also get prior approval from the club before the person orders it, just as a side note. It's recommended that you, online banking is so easy these days. It's crazy if you don't use it. Don't worry about a checkbook. Checks are so annoying. Just do online banking, please. But if you do use online banking, you should have your account set up that they require 2 people to approve all payments. So that way someone signs in, they create the payment, they approve it themselves, and then someone else has to go in and actually approve the payment before that money is then passed on to whoever you're paying, whether that's a supplier or reimbursing a member or whatnot. And that's just a checking procedure so that, you probably should have a couple of signatories on your bank account, whether that's definitely the treasurer and the president, and then maybe a couple other board members, your secretary, your vice president. If you've got other directors, maybe include them as well. I wouldn't recommend having too many people on there though, but it is handy having more than 2 people, particularly if you've got 2 to sign, because you might find, for example, if you know, it's just you and the president's unavailable that day, they don't have internet access, or, you know, they're on an overseas holiday, you need someone else to be able to log in and approve that payment, particularly if you've got a deadline on when the bill needs to be paid. You should also then keep all receipts. And if you don't have a receipt, the invoices that you've paid. So someone else may issue you an invoice to pay for something, particularly if you're running an event and hiring a venue, the venue will probably give you an invoice to pay for. You should keep a copy of all of that, because you're going to have to prove to your members exactly why you spent every cent. And depending on whether your club's incorporated or not and what your rules are, you may have to be audited as well. So that means you just present all your financial records to someone, should be someone with a qualification, to basically check over it and make sure everything tallies up and you've got evidence of every payment and so forth. I would also recommend keeping a spreadsheet of all money in and out, so that you are keeping track of what's in the bank account, but also so you don't get to the end of the year and be like, oh, we received this $100 from someone, I wonder where that came from. But so that you already know exactly what it is, so that when you're doing your end of year reporting or even your monthly reporting, you're aware of it all. Obviously, you can use a proper accounting software if you're interested in that and your club's willing to pay the fees and you think you have enough reason to do that. Otherwise, just a spreadsheet recording money in and out. Also, if you're issuing invoices and not using an accounting system and just doing invoices up in a Word document, you should keep a spreadsheet of all of the invoice numbers, and then therefore who they were issued to, what they were issued for, and the amount of the invoice, just so you've got that track as well, so you're not doubling up on numbers by accident. So as I mentioned with bank accounts, I would recommend having at least 4 signatories on there, being the treasurer, president, vice president, and secretary. If your club decides that you want to have a couple extra people on there, maybe the immediate past president, or, you know, your directors that you have, your clubs will all have different sorts of directors, so I'm not going to try and name some now, but, you know, if you've got them, feel free to add them on. But I wouldn't be having too many people on there, because, you know, it's lower security if you've got too many people on there. It's also recommended, or I think it may even be mandated by RI or some ruling somewhere that I can't think of at the top of my head, that each club should have 2 bank accounts. So you should have one bank account that's purely for your administration, so that's all your club funds, and that would be where your member dues go into. And then also a separate bank account for all of the funds that you've raised. So that bank account with your funds raised, all of the funds from that should go and be donated to charity. Obviously, you can retain some funds in there for seed funding for the next year. But say if we go back to that budget that I had back here, so we made it had all of this expenditure come from the admin account initially because there was funds in it. And this money may go into the admin account because we're just putting it back in. But it then should be transferred across to the charity account or fundraising account, so that it then, if we were fundraising for a charity, could go back and be donated and easily tracked. Whereas because this one was fundraising for the club funds, it's fine to stay in the admin account. Any questions about bank accounts or anything we've mentioned so far? I'm going to take that as a no and keep moving on. So as mentioned, oh, okay, sorry, back, there was a question. Let me just read it. Cameron, if you want to ask a question now, go for it. If you want to wait till the end, completely up to you. I don't think I have that many slides left. So yeah, if you want to go now, feel free. Okay, cool. So legal requirements, as I mentioned, I am not an expert by any means, even in New South Wales. I live in New South Wales, so I do know a bit about New South Wales incorporation status, but I have no clue about the rest of the states. I did a quick Google last night, and these were the government bodies that I came up with that are hopefully the correct ones for each state. They were just the first result I could find on Google at 11:30 last night, though, so they could be inaccurate. Do your own research and look into that and ask an expert in your state for your government requirements if you're incorporated. Financial statements should be prepared at the end of the year. If you're keen, you can do them every month for your monthly report to the board. Otherwise, they absolutely must be prepared at the end of every financial year, which conveniently lines up with the Rotary year. So a statement of income, also known as profit and loss statement, or a statement of financial performance is another word for it. There's like so many different names for the same statements, it's ridiculous. But essentially, statement of income is your income and expenses. So what it should have on there is all of your income, all of your expenditure, and then the leftover funds. That will have to include everything for the club. So it will include both your administration income and then also your fundraising income and expenditure for both. I would recommend splitting it up into different things. So noting that you've received, say, $100, which is a very low amount, but from membership fees, you've received maybe $2,000 from your fundraising, you've received this much sponsorship money from a Rotary club, so on and so forth, and then all of your expenditures should be listed out. I probably wouldn't list out, like in that project budget for the barbecue, list out that you spent this much on sausages, this much on drinks, this much on onion, but I would say that, you know, you could have venue hire as one cost, and then barbecue supplies as another cost, or even just event expenditure or something like that. But it does need to be more than just income was this, expenses was this. It needs to be broken down a little bit. And then obviously your income minus expenses is your profit or remaining funds, because technically your Rotaract Club should be a non-profit, so you shouldn't be really making profit per se, but it is okay to have retained funds, which are funds that you retain for the following year type thing. And then your statement of financial position, also known as your balance sheet, is where you record your assets, liabilities, and equity. So assets minus liabilities equals equity. Assets are basically all of the things that the club owns. So your bank account, for example, is an asset. You may also own things like if you own a barbecue trailer or something like that, that's an asset that should be listed. Most clubs probably won't have any liabilities by the end of the year. But for example, if you've had an invoice raised that you might have received, say, for example, on the 29th of June, you're holding an event in July that you've already been planned from, you've already booked the venue, and they've sent you the invoice as at 29th of June, but you have not yet paid it before the 30th of June, then you would have a liability sitting there that money is owed to the venue hire company. Otherwise, I can't imagine a Rotaract club really having any other liabilities, but each club's different, you may have some. And then your equity is just an accounting term. Technically with a business, it's what like the owner would then have really, like of their value of the business, but you still have to have it recorded in there, otherwise the financial, like the balance sheet won't balance. So yeah, then your assets minus liabilities equals equity. You can Google templates of these. They can look so many different ways, which is why I haven't put any templates in here. People have different ways of doing them, but if you Google them, you'll find a quick, easy template that's easy to follow. And I put my email address at the end of the slide. So if you have serious questions about financial statements, send me an email and I'll get back to you. So best practice sharing. My quick tips and tricks are that you are in total control of the club's funds. So as treasurer, you are solely responsible for making sure that the club's funds are used accurately and properly, but also that the club has enough funds to cover its expenses. So I found in the past that potentially, particularly being a university club, students might not necessarily want to pay too much for an event. So the club members want to try and make a ticket price $10, but then they want to spend all this expenditure and the $10 ticket price just isn't enough to cover the expenditure. And as treasurer, you are solely responsible for making sure that the books balance at the end of the year. So you need to be strong in encouraging the club that you are in charge of the finances, and so therefore you need to be involved in the discussion of setting a ticket price. But yeah, also do be considerate that everyone's human, and people may not be willing to pay such high prices. So the compromise from that might be, well, you guys want to do this great thing that's going to cost us money. can't actually afford that if you don't charge more for tickets, so you have to go to this thing that's going to be cheaper to do. The other thing I would say is make sure you actually raise some funds. So yeah, on that note, that if they keep the ticket price at $10, but the expenses are up here, you're not going to raise any money. So making sure that it balances out, so you do actually raise a little bit of funds, because if you're having an event to be a fundraiser and you don't actually raise any money, it's a lot of hard work and it's cost the club money anyway. So not particularly great. Did anyone else, I know most of you guys are new treasurers, but some of you had been treasurer before. Did you guys have any best practice tips that you wanted to share with everyone? I'll just give a minute in case anyone's furiously typing something. Yes, so keeping on top of your spreadsheets is a great idea. So it is a good idea with your monthly board meetings to be presenting monthly, rather than if you're not able to present a monthly statement, you're kind of not keeping on top of your job. But I would be making sure that every time you pay a bill or receive some money, you chuck it straight in that spreadsheet, so that you don't find yourself an hour before your board meeting furiously having to try and do it all. So from Gareth, making sure that all signatories have the banking app will make payments easier. Definitely. So many banks nowadays, I don't know which banks you guys all use for your different clubs, but so many do have a banking app that you can just have on your phone. So often it's so easy to jump in, approve a payment, make a payment. You don't really have to think about it. It shouldn't take any more than 2 minutes or 5 minutes at the absolute max. And if you make sure everyone's got the banking app and is already signed in, then when you need a bill paid absolutely quickly, then it's going to get done, rather than having to wait for someone to have access to a computer and sign in and find their password and all of that. So Sam's just asked if anyone utilizes an accounting software, or most people work directly off spreadsheets. Does anyone want to answer that question? Okay, so a couple of people said they use spreadsheets. I personally think unless you're doing a lot of invoicing and paying of bills, then you don't really need an accounting system. The absolute cheapest accounting system I found that's any good costs at least $10 a month. So that's $120 a year that your club would have to be spending, and spreadsheets should be good enough for your club's things. Couple other questions in there. We've got Amelia's asked whether it's good for keeping a hard copy of all invoices. I would personally say it's easier to just have them all saved digitally. So if you're emailed an invoice and then you pay it, 100% have a folder on Google Drive that's everything saved in, because it's so much easier to then share that folder with the incoming treasurer and utilize that for the next year. And also you might find that, for example, one treasurer was a bit slack and you've got to go back and do the financials for the last couple of years, particularly maybe if your club's incorporated and they haven't lodged the necessary details with the incorporation body, that you've then got to go back and actually figure out what was spent. And if it's a hard copy folder, getting people to physically hand that over is a lot harder to chase down than finding things in a Google Drive, so long as you've got access to the account that Google Drive was. On that note, every Rotaract club in Australia has access to to apply for having a free account made with Rotaract Australia. So I would be jumping on that. If any of you attending the IT tool breakout later on, it'll be discussed there more, but jump on that and have a folder within that Google Drive called finances, and then for each year, and be putting everything in that rather than in your own personal Google Drive. And that way it's easily accessed there for years to come without people having to try and remember who the treasurer was and that sort of thing. I'm just trying to catch up on the other questions. Sorry, guys. Cameron, I'm not aware of any rule about not doing online payments for membership fees. I think it should be totally fine. My only thing to note would be that occasionally you do have to collect certain details of members. So whether you collect that through the payment portal or whether you collect that detail from them on a separate form and then they just pay online. Alistair said a good example from another club was a reimbursement form. I would 100% recommend having one of those. If you're getting members to buy things often, so for example, like if you're running a barbecue and no one has a card to the club bank account, like a debit card or anything, and so someone is going out and using their own funds and then submitting the receipts, having a form for them to fill out is really handy, because then you've really got exactly a clear record to file as well of what that expenditure was for. You also then have a record of where they've entered in their bank account details, so that if you do happen to be audited or anything like that, you've got the evidence there to say why you paid that bank account so many dollars and that sort of thing. So a form is an easy way to record all that data. Sam, there are clubs that do not charge membership fees. I'm not sure exactly which ones. And I personally then don't know what their other income sources are to cover their costs. But I would be recommending, if your club has costs or intends to spend money on things that aren't necessarily fundraising related, like whether it's promoting the club or doing that sort of thing, charging a membership fee. Even if you're just providing a name tag to members, you need the money to pay for that name tag somewhere. So getting them to pay a membership fee is really handy. Yeah, like Natalie said, a membership fee to cover the name tag and Rotaract t-shirt. I know some clubs do different things where there's a joining fee and then an annual membership fee. So that joining fee might cover the cost of the t-shirt and the name tag or whatever you get when you join. But then the annual fee is just basically a donation that then goes to covering other clubs' costs. So yeah, that's handy. I'll just go to the next slide, which was questions. So does anyone, yeah, keep going with your questions if you guys have any other questions. Yeah. So I've just noticed in the chat, Gareth said earlier up that narrations on transactions will help keep track of moving funds. So where you do that spreadsheet where you record all of the income or all of the money in and out of the bank account, that's what 100% where I would be doing that description, so that you know exactly what each fund is, whether your description is purely like it's related to invoice 7, and then you've got to go into another thing to see what invoice 7 was for, whether it was membership dues for this person. Otherwise, yeah, I would highly recommend recording that in your spreadsheet, a description of each payment, because the bank statement might just say that it was a cash deposit of $200, but at least in your spreadsheet you can say that was the cash deposit of $200 from this barbecue on this date at this place, or something like that, so you can easily identify it. Did anyone have any other questions? So I saw David's asked in there about bank signatories. I personally haven't had any issues, but I know that each bank does have different rulings, which does make it difficult. And yeah, at least the handy thing with Rotaract clubs compared to like other organizations is that you guys should hopefully be in a close geographical area, so you can all go in to the branch. Yeah, so the club, the bank, each bank will actually need a copy of the minutes to state who the signatories are. And that will need to be, like, whether it's at a board meeting or at a club meeting, it needs to be a motion that's then moved, seconded, and voted upon, so that the bank has that evidence to update signatories, because otherwise they don't have a legal standpoint to change them. But I know, for example, like I've been on some other committees that are like spread all around Australia, and that's made it a little bit more difficult with banks because you can't all go into the branch together at the same time. So in those sort of instances, I would be selecting perhaps a bank that's a bit more widespread. So maybe one of your big four banks rather than like a local community bank, just so that, you know, like people have a local branch they can go into. But with your clubs, that shouldn't be such an issue because hopefully everyone can get to the same sort of geographical area. Did anyone have any other questions? So Sam, for setting up bank accounts, you do need exactly the same sort of minutes. I think you may have to specify when you're setting up bank accounts, though, exactly which bank you're planning to go with and how many accounts you're setting up. So, for example, you should have those 2 accounts, but then if you've got any additional, like the minutes might need to say, we move the motion that we will set up 2 checking accounts with Commonwealth Bank of Australia. The signatories will be as followed: moved by such and such, seconded by such and such, carried all in favour, that sort of thing. Different banks do have different wordings though. So like Alistair said there, Bendigo has quite a specific set of wording they need. If you're going to be setting up bank accounts with a new bank, I would recommend going into the branch first and just having a chat with them and checking exactly what they need, because they may also like have forms that need to be completed, particularly if you are a new club and you're setting it up. I just recently had to, in January, set up accounts for a new incorporated association. I had to take so much paperwork into the bank. I had to take in all of my documents to prove my identity as well as the incorporated association's identity. And then Commonwealth had to send it off to their verification team, which is somewhere else in the country. And it took like 2 months in the end to actually set up the bank accounts and have like the business verified and all of that. So it's a good idea to go in and see the bank first and make sure that you have everything. So then you also sometimes have to book a meeting within the branch to set up a bank account or change signatures depending on the bank. So going in, having that initial discussion, finding out what you need, and then booking a meeting, making sure that you've got everything you need at that meeting. Anyone have any other questions? Otherwise, Cameron, did you want to go with your questions you had before?
Can you hear me now? Or?
Yeah, I can hear you now. That's better.
Okay, awesome. Sorry, I'm just trying. I had to dial in with my phone, so trying to work out how to unmute myself on the phone and this. So, okay.
Good job.
So my question is, I think we've set up the bank account wrong to begin with. And I just wanted to ask if there was a way that you knew of to be able to rectify this. So we've got the 2 accounts set up. We've got the savings account, which is the fundraising account, and then we've got the statement account, which is the club admin fees. We've transferred everything into the club admin fees from the previous account because they only had 1 account. Yep. We were trying to chase up some background records, but we're not 100% sure where the allocations were. So it's currently in the statement account. We've raised an extra $5,000 in the fundraising account. But the problem is our checkbook is registered to the statement account. So if we want to write a check for an organisation, it's coming out of the club funds account. Now, granted, we've still got the money in there that we are going to transfer into the fundraising account. So that's how we're justifying it for now. But it's not a sustainable thing, because if we raise money, put it in a fundraising account and then go, all right, let's write a check to this organisation, we then have to transfer it back to the statement account, which I'm pretty sure you're not allowed to do. So I just wanted to know if there was a way.
So I would query initially why you're still using checks. Most organisations these days can happily give you your bank account details, and you can just do an online transfer. The other thing I would check is potentially both accounts maybe should have been set up as the same account type. So rather than having the fundraising as a savings account that you can't transfer out of, have it set up as just a regular checking account, but it just needs to be it doesn't have to be a special account type. It just needs to be a separate account from the admin account. So that way you could have, if you insist on having a checkbook from that account. So it may be worth having a discussion with your bank, and then you might just need to establish a new fundraising account, transfer all the money from the savings account across to that one, and close the savings account.
I'm pretty sure we can get a checkbook on the savings account that it's labelled as. So I think we can. I think it's just an additional $10.
So yeah,
but
I
was
would
just
be
curious if you've come across anything like that before and how to deal with it.
I think as well, I'm not sure exactly where it says, but I have read somewhere that you're not supposed to transfer between the fundraising account and your club account. But I would say if you are doing it for the sole purpose of, say, for example, if I'm looking at your bank statements as an auditor and I see that you've transferred $1,000 from the fundraising account to the club account, and then that same $1,000 from the club account to the cancer council, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, that's still pretty straightforward that it's gone as a donation and you've just had to do it that way because you couldn't transfer it directly from this account. I would say that I'm sure that some banks actually charge fees when you write a check and issue a check, sometimes when people bank a check. And also for the checkbook. So that is why I would recommend not bothering with a check, but just doing internet banking transfer, because they normally don't have any fees associated. Plus, you can still give someone a big novelty check and get that for the photos, and then you just get their BSB and bank account number and just do a transfer.
Yeah,
and then they don't have to worry about going all the way to a bank branch to bank the check, which is just painful. So that's why I would say get rid of your checkbooks. Obviously, you can still have your checkbook. David, I saw there you said we no longer need them. I think with this day and age, it's just painful. And particularly now that you've got an online banking app on your phone, you get two people in there, you as treasurer set up the payment, you send a text message to your president and you say, look, I just need you to jump on, approve this payment right now, done, dusted. Otherwise, you've got to wait till the next meeting when you're both in person, which with COVID, who knows when that's going to be. You've got to get them both to sign the check. Then you've got to physically get that check to someone. It could get lost in the mail. It's just a pain in the butt. And I just don't think it's necessary in the 21st century. So
that's a good suggestion. Thank you.
Did anyone else have any other questions?
Could I just ask again with asking about the bank issues that we had? I think I was treasurer 4 or 5 years ago, and the people that obviously get removed from your signatories list, that all gets put in minutes and you hand that over, and you have to tick off who you want modified and added and all that. And we still had the people that started our club on it as signatories, and then they would change it to only one person had to sign, and the contact of our club was someone that started our club up and had left.
Right.
So does the Rotary Australia have a bank that they recommend? Because I'm pretty sure this was NAB, but it was a big four either way. As it does happen every year. I just feel like it's going to be a lot of work.
I personally don't have a bank to recommend. I have found CBA to be painful as all heck. Okay. So I think they all have their issues. They all have, different benefits. I would put in your minutes this year that I would make sure it's documented that we want to remove all of these signatories and we want to add these ones. And that is all the signatories is, and put in your minutes every year if you have to, that the bank is to be signed. And that way, it's all there clearly it's a pain for you guys, but it's all there clearly documented for the bank that every year they get this set of minutes that says exactly what you guys want. And if they're stuffing it up year after year, I would be putting a complaint into the branch and chatting to the manager and saying, we go through this every year. You guys either need to fix your stuff or we're going to take our money elsewhere.
Yeah,
because I do that automated and try another bank.
Yeah, they probably don't really care anyway because they're not making money off that. Again, it's more obviously we got full-time jobs or not so much, but people that also do uni, and we have to go in 2 or 3 times at the start of the financial year because they keep stuffing it up. But I think we probably just stick it out then.
Well, I would still be saying something to at least the person you're dealing with in there, if not the branch manager, and just making it known because you are volunteers. Rotaract and Rotary are well-recognised organisations. There would be however many Rotary clubs in your area, and you say, look, I'm going to tell them all that you guys are painful as all heck, and we're going to take our banking elsewhere, and who knows how many other Rotary clubs might take their money elsewhere. And, some Rotary clubs have a couple of $100,000 in their bank account, and I'm sure they're happy to keep their money in their bank.
Well, that's true.
And if you start making those threats, then maybe they might do something. But I would, particularly for next year, if it's going to happen all again, in this set of minutes, make it very clear of all the changes you want, that this is to be the contact person, these are to be the signatories and no one else. Therefore, we are removing all current signatories, and even just leave it as that, rather than having to name people, unless they say you have to name people, saying that the accounts are to be 2 to sign, all of that, and that way they all have it on one document. But I don't understand, in my head, if this account's set up as 2 to sign, why are they changing it back to 1 to sign?
It's crazy.
That's ridiculous.
And then just so I don't forget, I haven't been too involved with it at the moment, but is it correct that you also have a debit card now available for purchases? Or
if the club wants one, you can certainly have one. It's definitely not necessary, I would say. But I mean, if the bank allows you to have one, I would sure as heck set one up. But I think sometimes to have one of those, the account has to be like a one signatory on it. So potentially if you're looking at having a debit card, I would set up a separate bank account just for that debit card. And so then say, for example, if you're running a barbecue and someone needs $500 to go out and buy all the supplies for the barbecue, put $500 from your club admin account, transfer it into the debit card account. You as treasurer, go spend that debit card or give the debit card to whoever in the club is responsible for going and doing that shopping. They do it all. They bring back all the receipts to you as treasurer. You reconcile them all against the statement, and do it that way, because then you've got that separate account that will be one to sign for the debit card. But also it's just a good security feature that way, if the debit card gets lost or stolen, all of your club funds don't disappear, because that bank account should be empty when it's not being used, or keep a buffer of $50 in it or something type thing.
Yeah. All right. That makes sense.
Yeah. We've got 2 minutes left. Did anyone have any other questions, or should we jump back into the main session? All right, so Amelia's just said her bank said they weren't allowed to have a debit card. It does, it depends on which bank you're with and their rulings and all of that sort of stuff. So unfortunately, I'm not sure which banks do allow you, which ones don't, but just shop around and find the best bank for your club. I'm going to sign off now, guys. Hopefully, does anyone need the link to get back to the main session, or you're all good with jumping back in? But I think we've got a really good session next up with governance. So thank you all for joining, and see you back there.